Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Dimitri, and this channel is all about the stories that America forgot. We're talking about ghost towns, unsolved mysteries, historical events that sound too crazy to be true, but they are. So hit that subscribe button, because we've got a hell of a story for you today. Let's get into it. 20 women died in Salem's witch trials. That's what every history book tells you. 19 hanged. 1 pressed to death. Case closed. Story over. America's darkest chapter reduced to a cautionary tale about mass hysteria that lasted less than a year. But I have documents that prove the trials never ended. They just went underground. For the next 58 years, until 1750, Salem continued to execute witches. Not 20 women, 220 women. And the families who carried out these secret executions still control Salem today. Right now, as you read this, the descendants of Salem's secret executioners sit on the city council, run the historical society, own the tourist attractions that profit from a sanitized version of genocide. They know where the bodies are buried, because their ancestors buried them. They know the names of the dead because their families kept lists. They know the truth because they've spent 3 centuries hiding it. The Salem Witch Museum receives over 300,000 visitors a year. Each one learns about the 20 official victims: Rebecca Nurse, Martha Corey, Bridget Bishop. Names preserved in history. Martyrs to superstition. But no one learns about Mary Blackwood, burned alive in 1710, Elizabeth Hartley, drowned in 1723, Sarah Nightingale, buried alive in 1735, or the 217 others whose names were erased from history as efficiently as their bodies were erased from life. I've spent 15 years investigating Salem's real history. What I've found will destroy everything you think you know about America's founding. The witch trials weren't a brief outbreak of religious extremism. They were a systematic purge that lasted 6 decades. They weren't about superstition. They were about property, power, and establishing bloodlines that would control New England for centuries. Let me show you the evidence they've spent 300 years trying to hide. The mass graves beneath Salem's most famous landmarks. The coded records hidden in plain sight in the town archives. The financial empire built on stolen property. And the shadow organization that still meets in Salem 13 times a year to ensure the truth never comes out. To understand what really happened, you need to forget everything you've been taught about Salem. The official story is a carefully constructed lie created in 1750 when the killings finally stopped. Not because of enlightenment or reason, but because they'd run out of victims. Every woman who posed a threat to the established order was dead. The work was complete. Time to rewrite history. The official Salem witch trials began in 1692 and ended in 1693. That much is true. But they were just the public face of something much larger. A test run. A proof of concept. When the public trials ended due to outside pressure from Boston clergy and colonial governors, the real trials began. Secret trials, held at night, in hidden locations, with no records, no witnesses, no survivors. The Putnam family led these shadow trials. History remembers Thomas Putnam as one of the main accusers in the public trials. What history doesn't record is that he established a secret court that operated for the next 58 years. The Court of Oyer and Terminer officially disbanded in 1693. The Shadow Court never disbanded. It just stopped advertising. I discovered the first evidence of the Shadow Court in the basement of the Putnam family estate, now a bed and breakfast that advertises its authentic colonial charm. Behind a false wall, I found records. Not official documents, those were too dangerous. but coded ledgers, financial records that told a story of systematic murder. Every execution was recorded as a land transaction. Every victim listed as a seller. Every stolen property documented as lawfully purchased. The code was simple once you understood it. Seller departed for Providence meant hanged. Seller removed to the indigenous territories meant burned. Seller sailed for England meant drowned. 220 sellers between 1693 and 1750. All women, all property owners, all dead. The pattern was brilliant in its simplicity. A woman would be accused of witchcraft in secret. No public trial, no spectacle, just a quiet arrest in the night. She would disappear. Her property would be seized for abandonment. The accusers would divide her assets, then move on to the next victim. But they were careful. Never too many at once, never anyone too prominent. Always women who were vulnerable. Widows, spinsters, women without male protectors, women who'd inherited property, women who'd refused marriage proposals from the right families, women who knew too much about the wrong things. Sarah Blackwood was the first victim after the public trials ended. A widow who owned 300 acres of prime farmland, land the Putnam family had been trying to buy for years. She refused to sell. On October 13, 1693, less than 5 months after the official trials ended, Sarah disappeared. The town records show she relocated to Connecticut for her health. The Putnam records show something different. A single line in Latin, combusta est. She was burned. Her land was declared abandoned after 6 months. The Putnams bought it at auction for a fraction of its value. No one asked questions. Everyone was tired of witch trials, tired of death, tired of fear. They wanted to move on. The Shadow Court counted on this exhaustion. It was their cover. The executions were carried out at night in a place called Gallows Hill. Not the famous Gallows Hill where the public hangings occurred. That's a tourist attraction now. The real Gallows Hill is 2 miles north on private property. Property that's been in the same family, the Putnam family, for 3 centuries. I've been there. Trespassed in the dead of night with ground-penetrating radar. What I found was a killing field. Mass graves arranged in concentric circles around a central point. The central point is a stone platform, black granite, imported from Scotland, carved with symbols that aren't quite Christian, aren't quite pagan, but something in between, something older. The radar showed at least 200 bodies, all female based on pelvic bone measurements, all showing signs of violent death. Crushed skulls, broken necks, charred bones. They're stacked like cordwood in pits 20 feet deep. No coffins, no shrouds, no dignity. Just disposed of like garbage. But the Shadow Court kept meticulous records of their garbage. Each woman's name, age, property holdings, method of execution, date of death, location of burial, all coded, all hidden, all preserved because the families involved were proud of their work. They saw themselves as gardeners, weeding out the undesirable, cultivating the pure, creating a new Eden in New England. The methods of execution evolved over time. In the beginning, they stuck to hanging. Quick, quiet, efficient. But hanging leaves marks. Bodies can be examined. Questions can be asked. So they innovated. Drowning became popular in the 1700s. The accused would be taken to Salem Harbor at night, weighted with stones, thrown from boats. If she sank and drowned, she was innocent, but dead. If she somehow floated, she was guilty and drowned anyway. Either way, the body washed out to sea. No evidence, No grave, no problem. Burning was reserved for special cases. Women who'd fought back, who'd accused their accusers, who'd tried to expose the shadow court. Mary Henderson in 1705 discovered what was happening, tried to alert the governor. She was intercepted, charged in secret with maleficium most foul, burned alive in a specially constructed iron cage that concentrated the heat. It took her 3 hours to die. The shadow court made other potential whistleblowers watch. The message was clear: speak and burn. But the most insidious method was live burial, reserved for women who were pregnant. The shadow court had a theological problem with executing pregnant women. The child was innocent. But they also couldn't wait for the child to be born. The woman might escape, might talk. So they buried them alive. The woman would suffocate slowly. The child would die with her. Both souls left to God's judgment. The shadow court felt this absolved them of murder. God chose who lived or died, not them. Elizabeth Hartley was 4 months pregnant when she was accused in 1723. Her husband had died at sea. His brother wanted her property. He was a member of the shadow court. Elizabeth was buried in a pine box on November 3rd. The box was designed with small air holes, not enough to survive, just enough to prolong the agony. Just enough for her to scratch her fingers bloody on the wood. Just enough for her to carve a message that would never be read. My baby kicks as we die. I know she carved this because I've seen the box. It's in the basement of the Salem Historical Society, labeled as a colonial grain storage container. But you can still see the scratch marks on the inside, still see the desperate words. Still see the small skeleton curled in the larger one when you x-ray through the wood. The Salem Historical Society knows what it is. The director, Patricia Putnam Hawthorne, is a direct descendant of both the Putnam and Hawthorne families. Her ancestors ran the shadow court. Her family inherited the evidence. She keeps it as a trophy. I confronted Patricia once, showed her my research, asked her directly about the shadow court. She smiled and said, "Salem has many stories. We choose which ones to tell." Then she had me banned from the Historical Society, had my research privileges revoked, had my academic credentials questioned. But she didn't deny it. She couldn't, because it's true. The financial records tell the real story. Between 1693 and 1750, 6 families in Salem increased their land holdings by over 3,000%. The Putnams, the Hawthorns, the Porters, the Ingersolls, the Corwins, the Hathorns. All families with members on the shadow court. All families who got rich from murder. They didn't just steal land, they stole entire lives. When a woman was executed, everything she owned became unclaimed property. Money, jewelry, furniture, livestock, even recipes and knowledge. Mary Brennan was Salem's best midwife, delivered half the babies in town, knew herbs and healing. When she was drowned in 1715, her medical knowledge was claimed by Dr. Corwin. Her herb garden was transplanted to his property. Her book of remedies was copied into his journals. He became Salem's most famous physician, built his reputation on a dead woman's wisdom. The shadow court also stole children. When they executed mothers, the children were adopted by court families, raised as servants, their inheritance stolen, their names changed, their histories erased. How many prominent Salem families are actually descended from victims, not victors? How many bloodlines were hijacked through murder and forced adoption? James Hartley was 3 when his mother Elizabeth was buried alive. He was adopted by the Porter family, raised as James Porter, never told his real name, never told his mother's fate. He grew up serving the family that murdered her, married who they told him to marry, named his children what they told him to name them. His descendants still live in Salem, still carry the Porter name, still don't know their true heritage. But some records survived, hidden in attics, buried in walls, sewn into quilts. The victims and their families tried to preserve truth. Martha Prescott, before her execution in 1731, embroidered her story into a sampler. It looked like a decorative piece with Bible verses, but the first letter of each line spelled out, "They kill us for our land, the Shadow Court of Salem." That sampler hangs in the Peabody, Essex Museum, labeled as Anonymous Colonial Needlework. They know who made it. They know what it says. They display it because they know no one will see the code. The killing accelerated in the 1740s. The Shadow Court was getting sloppy, or greedy, or both. They were taking more risks, killing prominent women, women with connections outside Salem. It was getting harder to explain the disappearances, harder to hide the graves, harder to silence the questions. Then something happened in 1748 that almost exposed everything. A young woman named Grace Whitfield was accused. But Grace was different. She was educated. She'd lived in Boston. She knew law. And she knew what the Shadow Court was doing. When they came for her, she was ready. She'd hidden documents all over Salem, letters to newspapers, testimonies from other victims, maps to the mass graves, evidence that would destroy the Shadow Court. She told them if she disappeared, the documents would be released. A dead man's switch 3 centuries before the internet. The Shadow Court tried to find the documents, searched her house, tortured her. But Grace had been clever. She'd hidden them in the one place the all-male Shadow Court would never look, in the homes of their own wives. Sewn into corsets, hidden in recipe books, tucked behind needlework. The wives didn't know what they were hiding, but Grace knew they'd never be searched. For 2 years, the Shadow Court was paralyzed. They couldn't kill Grace without risking exposure, but they couldn't let her live. She knew too much, had seen too much, was gathering more evidence every day. Finally, in 1750, they made a deal. Grace would leave Salem forever, take her evidence with her, never speak of what she knew. In exchange, the Shadow Court would stop. No more killings, no more trials. The work was done anyway. They controlled Salem completely, owned most of the land, held every position of power. The threatening women were all dead. Time to become respectable. Grace agreed. She left Salem on July 13, 1750, took a ship to England, was never heard from again. The ship's records show she boarded, but no records show she ever arrived. The Shadow Court's reach was longer than she'd thought. With Grace gone, the Shadow Court transformed. They became the Salem Preservation Society, guardians of history, keepers of memory. They would control the narrative, decide what was remembered and what was forgotten, create the version of Salem that the world would know. They were brilliant at it. They turned Salem's witch trials into a tourist attraction, made money from the story of their victims, but only the 20 official victims, the ones from 1692, the ones whose deaths couldn't be hidden. The rest were erased, written out of history, buried in unmarked graves and unmarked memory. They created the Salem Witch Museum in 1972. It tells the official story: 20 victims, mass hysteria, lesson learned, never again. Visitors leave thinking they know what happened in Salem. They don't know about the Shadow Court, the 200 additional victims, the 58 years of secret trials, the families that still profit from murder. Every October, Salem makes millions from Halloween tourism. Witch costumes, witch tours, witch merchandise. The descendants of the Shadow Court own most of these businesses. They're still profiting from the women they killed, still controlling the narrative, still hiding the truth. But they kept records. That was their mistake. They were so proud of what they'd done, so convinced of their righteousness, so certain they'd never be exposed. They kept everything, every name, every execution, every stolen property, every adopted child. It's all documented, all preserved, all hidden in plain sight. The records are distributed among the 6 families. Each family has part of the archive. None has the complete picture. It's a safeguard. No one family can expose the others without exposing themselves. Mutually assured destruction. But I've spent 15 years piecing it together, breaking into houses, copying documents, following paper trails. I have 90% of the picture, enough to prove what happened, enough to name names, enough to destroy Salem's carefully constructed mythology. The Putnam family records are in a climate-controlled vault beneath their family law firm. Putnam & Associates has been Salem's most powerful legal firm for 2 centuries. They keep their ancestors' crimes literally beneath their feet. 12 volumes of coded trial records, each one detailing murders they call justice. The Hawthorne records are in the Salem Public Library, in the restricted archive, available only to qualified researchers. Qualification is determined by bloodline. If you're not descended from the Shadow Court, you're not qualified. But I got in, posed as a descendant, spent 3 days copying everything before they discovered my deception. The Hawthorne records revealed something that chilled me to my core. The executions weren't random. They followed a pattern, a biological pattern. The Shadow Court was conducting an experiment in human breeding. They were selectively removing women with certain traits: red hair, green eyes, left-handedness, high intelligence, independence, strength. They were culling the female population like livestock, breeding for compliance and weakness. They had a term for it: the Great Purification. The goal was to create a perfect Salem. A Salem where women were obedient, where bloodlines were controlled, where the 6 families would rule forever through genetic manipulation disguised as divine judgment. Dr. Samuel Corwin, the Shadow Court's physician, kept detailed notes on each victim: height, weight, eye color, hair color, number of children, intelligence markers, physical abnormalities. He was creating a database 300 years before computers, tracking genetic traits, identifying patterns, deciding who lived and who died based on characteristics passed from mother to daughter. Sarah Nightingale was executed in 1735, not because she was a witch, but because she was brilliant. She could read and write in 4 languages. She understood mathematics. She'd invented a new method of preserving food that extended shelf life by months. The Shadow Court saw intelligence in women as dangerous. It could be passed to daughters, create future threats. Better to eliminate it at the source. The Nightingale execution was particularly cruel. They didn't just kill Sarah. They killed her 3 daughters, ages 16, 14, and 11, all showing signs of their mother's intelligence, all threats to the future order. The Shadow Court called it pulling weeds by the roots. The entire female line eliminated in one night. The family genetics removed from Salem's gene pool forever. But they made a mistake. Sarah had a 4th daughter, baby Margaret, 6 months old, left with a wet nurse that night. The Shadow Court didn't know she existed. Sarah had hidden the pregnancy and birth, knew she was being watched, knew her daughters were in danger. Baby Margaret survived, was raised by the wet nurse, grew up, had daughters of her own. Her descendants still live in Salem, still carry the intelligence the Shadow Court tried to eliminate. One of them is a professor at Harvard, another is a federal judge. They don't know their heritage, but they are living proof that the Shadow Court failed. The Porter family records, hidden in a false floor in their ancestral home, reveal the economic scope of the murders. By 1750, the 6 families controlled 80% of Salem's wealth. They owned the ships, the warehouses, the farms, the mills, every major business, every important property, all stolen from dead women, all built on blood. They created a detailed accounting system. Each executed woman's assets were divided according to strict rules. The accuser got 40%, the judge got 20%, the executioner got 10%. The remaining 30% went to the Shadow Court's treasury, used to bribe officials, silence witnesses, fund future operations. Murder was a business, and business was good. Elizabeth Hartley, the pregnant woman buried alive in 1723, owned a shipping company. 3 vessels, trade routes to the Caribbean, worth a fortune. After her murder, the ships were divided. The Putnams got 1, the Hawthorns got 1, the Porters got 1. They renamed the ships, erased Elizabeth's name from the registers, claimed they'd purchased them legally. Her ships made them rich. Her death made them richer. But Elizabeth had hidden something. In the hold of her largest ship, she'd created a secret compartment. Inside were documents, not about shipping, about the Shadow Court. She'd been investigating them for years, collecting evidence, building a case. She knew they would come for her eventually. She wanted proof to survive, even if she didn't. The compartment wasn't discovered until 1923, 200 years after Elizabeth's murder. Workers renovating the ship, now a museum, found it. Inside were letters, testimonies, maps, names, dates, methods. Everything needed to prove the Shadow Court existed. The workers turned the documents over to the Salem Historical Society. Patricia Putnam Hawthorne's grandmother was director then. The documents disappeared. But not before a worker named Michael O'Brien photographed them. Those photographs are why I know what I know. Michael O'Brien tried to publicize the photographs in 1924. No newspaper would publish them. No historian would authenticate them. He was labeled a fraud, a sensationalist, an anti-Salem propagandist. He lost his job, his reputation, his family. But he never stopped believing, never stopped trying to tell the truth. When he died in 1973, his son found the photographs, brought them to Boston University, where I found them in 2009. Started my investigation, started uncovering Salem's real history. The Ingersoll family records were the hardest to find. They'd been burned, or so the family claimed. A convenient fire in 1890 destroyed their ancestral home and all historical documents. But I found references to a backup archive, hidden somewhere in Salem. Took me 3 years to locate it. It was in the last place anyone would look, the basement of a church. The first church of Salem, established in 1629, has a basement that predates the church. Older foundations, older purposes. The Ingersolls had hidden their records in a sealed room behind the furnace. I found it during a historical tour when I slipped away from the group. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the scale of the murders. The Ingersolls didn't just record executions, they recorded experiments. The Shadow Court wasn't just killing witches, They were studying them, trying to understand what made certain women dangerous, what made them independent, what made them resist male authority. They were conducting autopsies, examining brains, looking for physical differences, trying to find the biological source of female rebellion. Dr. Ingersoll's notes from 1741 are especially disturbing. He dissected the brain of Martha Prescott after her execution, weighed it, measured it, compared it to male brains, found it was larger than average, more developed in certain regions. He concluded that intelligent women had aberrant brain development that needed to be corrected through termination. They were creating a pseudoscience of female inferiority, using murder to prove their theories, killing women and then studying their bodies to justify killing more women. A self-perpetuating cycle of violence dressed up as research. But some women fought back in ways the Shadow Court never expected. They used the accusation of witchcraft as a weapon. If they were going to die as witches, they would die as witches. They would curse their killers. Not with magic. Magic isn't real. But with something more powerful. Truth. Martha Prescott, before her execution in 1731, stood before the Shadow Court and spoke for 3 hours. She named every member, described every murder, listed every theft, predicted their downfall, said their own daughters would destroy them, their own blood would betray them, their own names would become curses. The Shadow Court laughed, had her tongue cut out, hanged her, burned the body, scattered the ashes. But they couldn't burn her words. Someone in that room wrote them down, hid them, preserved them. They're in the Ingersoll records. Every word, every name, every prediction. And Martha was right. The Shadow Court's daughters did destroy them, not intentionally, but through marriage, through children, through the dilution of bloodlines. By 1800, the 6 families had intermarried so much they were practically one family. The genetic diversity they'd tried to eliminate in their victims was eliminated in themselves. Inbreeding, weakness, madness. The Corwin family was the first to fall. By 1820, every male heir was dead or insane. Syphilis, the records say, but also hemophilia, also hereditary madness. The fruits of generations of cousins marrying cousins. The family that had killed women for being too different died because they'd become too similar. The Haythorns tried to escape their legacy by changing their name to Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne, the famous author, was born Nathaniel Haythorne. Added the W to distance himself from his ancestors. He knew what they'd done. Wrote about it obliquely in his fiction. Young Goodman Brown isn't just a story about Puritan hypocrisy. It's about the Shadow Court, the secret meetings in the forest, the prominent citizens who were secretly murderers. He knew because his family had records, had participated, had profited. But even name changes couldn't escape the curse. The Hawthorne family today is reduced to 3 members, all female, all unmarried, all childless. The bloodline that killed women for reproducing is failing to reproduce. Martha Prescott's curse made manifest. The Ingersoll family lasted longer, but fell harder. In 1929, the family fortune was lost in the stock market crash. Poetic justice. Wealth stolen from murdered women evaporated in a day. The family scattered. Descendants changed their names, denied their heritage, erased themselves from history as thoroughly as they'd erased their victims. Only the Putnams, Porters, and what remains of the other families, through intermarriage, still control Salem. They adapted, evolved, learned to hide better. They run the museums, the historical societies, the tourist industry. They've turned their crimes into commerce, made their victims into merchandise. Sell the story of 20 witches to hide the murder of 200. But they still meet. The Salem Preservation Society gathers 13 times a year, always at night, always in private, always in the same location, the original meeting house of the Shadow Court. It's a private building now, owned by a trust. The trust is controlled by the families. The building is maintained, but never opened, never photographed, never discussed. I've watched these meetings from a distance, seen who attends, tracked license plates, identified participants. It's not just the old families, it's new money too. Tech billionaires, pharmaceutical executives, defense contractors, people with power, people with secrets. People who understand that Salem's real history is about control, not witchcraft. What did they discuss in these meetings? I've never been inside, but I've found minutes from a meeting in 1997, left in a briefcase, in a coffee shop, by someone careless. Or maybe someone who wanted the truth to come out. The discussion was about maintaining the narrative, keeping the focus on 1692, discrediting researchers who get too close to the truth, managing DNA testing that might reveal connections between victims and modern families, ensuring certain graves are never excavated, keeping certain documents sealed. They specifically mentioned my name, called me a problem requiring traditional solution. Traditional solution. That's their euphemism for murder. They can't hang me as a witch, but they can arrange an accident, a suicide, a disappearance, like they did to Michael O'Brien's son in 1974, like they did to Professor Janet Williams in 1983, like they did to investigative journalist Robert Chin in 1991. All got too close to the truth. All died mysteriously. All had their research disappear. But I've taken precautions. This document exists in multiple copies, in multiple locations, with multiple people. If something happens to me, it gets released. Everything. Every name, every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. The complete history of Salem's Shadow Court and its 200 hidden victims. The mass graves are still there, under the Putnam property, under the Salem Mall parking lot, under the foundation of the new courthouse. Ground-penetrating radar confirms it. 200 women, murdered between 1693 and 1750, erased from history, but not from the earth. The youngest victim was Catherine Morris, age 14, executed in 1728 for unseemly intelligence and refusing marriage to a suitable man. The suitable man was 43, a member of the Shadow Court. He wanted her father's printing press. Got it after Catherine and her father both died. Her crime was saying no. Her punishment was being pressed to death like Giles Corey. But slowly, over 3 days. Weight added pound by pound. Her ribs breaking one by one. Her lungs slowly crushed. Her final words gasped through blood. I said no. The oldest victim was Margaret Fletcher, age 73, executed in 1745 for corrupting young women with dangerous ideas. The dangerous ideas were literacy and arithmetic. She'd been teaching girls to read and count, skills that made them harder to cheat, harder to control, harder to kill. Margaret was burned alive, but not before watching her students burn first. 7 girls, ages 8 to 15, all murdered for the crime of learning to read. The Shadow Court kept trophies, personal items from victims, jewelry, hair, finger bones. They're still in Salem, in private collections, in family vaults. The Putnam family has a necklace made from victims' wedding rings, melted down and reformed, worn by Putnam brides for 3 centuries, each bride adding to the curse, wearing the circles of love stolen from murdered women. The Porter family has a quilt, made from victims' dresses, each square from a different woman, each pattern telling a story of theft and murder. It's displayed in their family home. Visitors admire its craftsmanship, don't know they're looking at grave goods, don't know each stitch represents a stolen life. The combined wealth of the 6 families, adjusted for inflation and investment returns, is approximately $4 billion today. $4 billion built on the bodies of 200 women. That's $20 million per murder, per life, per stolen future. Blood money compounded over centuries. They've used this wealth to shape America, fund politicians, buy judges, control media, influence culture. The shadow court never really ended. It just got bigger, got subtler, got better at hiding. The techniques they perfected in Salem, false accusations, property theft, controlling narrative, became the template for American power. Every museum in Salem tells the same story. 20 witches, mass hysteria, never again. It's coordinated, controlled, designed to satisfy curiosity without revealing truth. Tourists leave thinking they've learned history. They've learned mythology. Carefully crafted, constantly reinforced. Protecting the guilty by pretending they're gone. But they're not gone. Patricia Putnam Hawthorne still runs the Historical Society. James Porter Ingersoll still controls the City Council. The Hawthorne Trust still owns half of downtown Salem. They meet at charity galas, historical preservation fundraisers, Halloween festivals, smile for cameras, give speeches about remembering the past. Never mention they're still living off its profits. I've tried to get DNA testing done on the remains, tried to match victims to modern descendants, blocked at every turn. The graves are on private property, protected by law, by lawyers, by the families that created them. They say it would be disrespectful to disturb the dead they murdered, the dead they've been disturbing for profit for 3 centuries. The breakthrough came in 2019 when construction workers renovating the Salem Mall accidentally broke through into an old tunnel system. Before the families could cover it up, before the police could seal the area, one worker live-streamed what he found on Facebook. The video lasted 4 minutes before it was deleted. But 4 minutes was enough. I screen recorded it. Frame by frame, it showed skeletal remains, dozens of them, arranged in rows, still wearing remnants of colonial-era clothing, still showing signs of violent death. The city claimed it was a colonial-era cemetery. Perfectly normal. Nothing unusual. They reburied the remains in Salem's official cemetery with a small ceremony. No investigation, no DNA testing, no questions asked. But I was there. I saw them loading the bones, counted them. 43 skeletons, all female, all showing trauma consistent with execution. These weren't cemetery burials. These were dumped bodies. One skeleton still had iron shackles on its wrists. Another had an iron collar around its neck. These weren't normal colonial burial practices. These were prisoners. These were victims. These were some of the shadow court's missing women. I managed to obtain a tooth from one skeleton. Don't ask how. Had it tested at a private lab in Germany. The results were extraordinary. The DNA matched a living descendant, a woman named Jennifer Marshall who lives in Boston. Her family always said they were descended from Salem colonists. They didn't know their ancestor was murdered by those colonists. Jennifer's ancestor was Ruth Marshall, who disappeared from Salem records in 1704. The official story was she moved to Virginia, The tooth proves otherwise. She never left Salem. She's been under the mall parking lot for 3 centuries, murdered for owning a tavern that the Porter family wanted, erased from history except for her DNA crying out from a stolen tooth. When I told Jennifer, she didn't believe me at first. Then I showed her the evidence, the DNA match, the historical records, the shadow court documents mentioning Ruth's execution for maintaining a disorderly house and corrupting public morals. Jennifer cried. Then she got angry. Then she hired lawyers. She's suing the city of Salem for concealing evidence of murder. The case is ongoing. The city is fighting hard, too hard for something that supposedly doesn't matter. But Jennifer's case opened floodgates. Other descendants started coming forward, people who'd always wondered why their Salem ancestors disappeared, why family trees had gaps, why women vanished from records. I've been contacted by over 100 families, all with missing women, all from Salem, all between 1693 and 1750. Martha Stewart, not the celebrity, a retired teacher from Maine, discovered her ancestor Elizabeth Stewart was executed in 1718. The shadow court records list her crime as excessive literacy and teaching slaves to read. Martha had always wondered why her family had no records before 1720. Now she knows. They were destroyed when Elizabeth was murdered. Her entire library burned, her school demolished, her students scattered, her name erased. But Elizabeth had hidden something. A book, buried in a metal box under a tree. The tree is gone, but the box survived. Martha found it using old property maps and metal detectors. Inside was a handwritten journal, Elizabeth's account of the shadow court. Names, dates, murders she'd witnessed, women she'd tried to save. A first-hand record of Salem's secret trials. Elizabeth wrote about trying to create an underground railroad for accused women, helping them escape Salem before the shadow court could arrest them. She saved 13 women before she was caught. Those 13 women fled to other colonies, started new lives, had daughters. Their descendants are scattered across America, living proof that not everyone died. Some escaped, some survived, some remembered. The journal also contains something extraordinary, a coded message. Elizabeth knew she would be caught eventually. She embedded information in her journal using a cipher based on biblical verses. When decoded, it reveals the location of more evidence, documents she'd hidden, testimonies she'd collected, proof of the shadow court's existence. I followed Elizabeth's directions, found the hiding place. It's under what's now a Starbucks. The documents were still there, wrapped in oiled leather, preserved by some miracle of chemistry and climate. 30 pages of testimonies, signed, witnessed, dated. Women describing their accusations, their trials, their torture. Women who were still alive when Elizabeth hid these documents. Women who died soon after. One testimony stands out. Mary Blackwood, not the one burned in 1710, her daughter, also named Mary. She describes watching her mother's execution, describes the men who did it, names them, all 6 family patriarchs, describes how they laughed as her mother burned, how they divided her mother's property that same night, how they celebrated with wine made from her mother's vineyard. Young Mary escaped that night, ran into the woods, survived on berries and stolen food, made it to Boston, told her story to anyone who would listen. No one believed her. A traumatized child, making up stories, seeing witches where there were none. She was sent back to Salem, to an orphanage, run by the Shadow Court families. She disappeared 2 weeks later. Her testimony, hidden by Elizabeth Stewart, is the only proof she ever existed. The documents also reveal the Shadow Court's connection to the Salem merchant elite. This wasn't just about land. It was about trade routes, shipping contracts, international commerce. Many of the executed women were involved in trade. They had connections to Europe, to the Caribbean, to Africa. They were competition. They were eliminated. Rebecca Morse owned 3 ships that traded with the West Indies. After her execution in 1726, those ships were absorbed into the Putnam fleet. Sarah Chen, yes, a Chinese woman in colonial Salem, ran an import business specializing in tea and silk. After her drowning in 1732, the Hawthorne family took over her contracts. These weren't just random victims. They were targeted for their economic value. The Shadow Court also eliminated women who knew too much about certain cargo. Salem ships were involved in the triangle trade: slaves, sugar, rum. Some women opposed this, spoke out, tried to document the human cost. They were silenced permanently. Hannah Foster kept records of slave ships coming through Salem. Numbers, names, deaths during passage. She was building a case against the trade, planning to present it to progressive clergy in Boston. She was executed in 1738. Her records were burned, but she'd made copies, hidden them. They're part of what Elizabeth Stewart preserved. Those records show that the 6 families were deeply involved in slave trading, made enormous profits, used some of those profits to fund the Shadow Court. Blood money funding blood trials, murder funding murder. A perfect circle of death. But the families made mistakes. They kept souvenirs, trophies, proof of their power. These items were passed down through generations. Some ended up in estate sales, antique shops, museums, not labeled correctly, not understood, but evidence nonetheless. I found a judge's gavel in an antique shop in Boston, 18th century, carved with initials, TP for Thomas Putnam. The handle is stained dark. The seller thought it was old wood polish. I had it tested. It's blood. Human blood. DNA too degraded to identify specific victims, but human, female, multiple contributors. This gavel didn't just sentence women to death. It was used to beat them. In the Peabody Essex Museum, there's a collection of colonial domestic items, including what's labeled as a yarn winder. It's not. It's a torture device used to break fingers. The Shadow Court used it to force confessions. The museum knows, has to know. The bloodstains are obvious. The mechanism is clearly designed to crush, not wind. But they maintain the lie. Yarn winder, domestic item. Nothing to see here. The Salem Witch Museum gift shop sells replicas of colonial jewelry. One piece is based on an original in their collection, a silver locket with a portrait inside. The portrait is of Mary Townsend, executed in 1741. The locket was her mother's, taken from Mary when she was arrested, kept as a trophy by the Porter family, donated to the museum in 1963. Now they sell copies to tourists, $500 each, profiting from murder 3 centuries later. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. In 2021, a Porter family descendant contacted me. Robert Porter, estranged from his family, dying of cancer, wanting to clear his conscience. He had documents, original Shadow Court proceedings, not copies, not transcriptions, originals. His great-aunt had left them to him, told him to keep them safe, never let the family know he had them. She'd stolen them decades earlier, knew what they were, knew what they proved, wanted someone outside the family to have them, someone who might someday tell the truth. The documents are devastating. Complete trial records for 17 executions, not coded, not abbreviated, full transcripts, including the women's defenses, their words, their voices, preserved by their killers, who thought no one would ever read them. Anne Bradley, executed in 1733, defended herself for 6 hours. Quoted law, quoted scripture, pointed out logical fallacies in the accusations, demanded to confront her accusers, demanded a public trial, demanded a lawyer. All denied. Her intelligence shines through the transcript, her courage, her dignity. Her last words, "You kill me not for witchcraft, but for being everything you fear in a woman. Educated, independent, and unafraid." Susan Mitchell, executed in 1729, used her trial to expose the Shadow Court's financial motives. Listed every woman they'd killed, every property they'd stolen, every child they'd orphaned. Calculated the total value, showed how each family had enriched itself through murder. The court recorder noted, "The accused speaks truths that cannot be permitted." She was gagged for the rest of her trial, sentenced to death in silence. But her words were recorded, preserved, waiting 3 centuries for someone to read them. The youngest victim in these records was Alice Harper, 12 years old, executed in 1737. Her crime? She'd inherited her grandmother's house. The Ingersoll family wanted it. Alice had no parents, no protectors, just a house worth stealing. The trial transcript is heartbreaking. She didn't understand what was happening, kept asking for her cat, wondering who would feed it. The Shadow Court spent 3 hours interrogating a child about Satan while planning to steal her home. These documents prove beyond any doubt that the Shadow Court existed, that they murdered women for profit, that they kept detailed records of their crimes, that they were proud of what they did, thought they were doing God's work, thought they were building a better world. A world where women knew their place, where the 6 families ruled forever, where violence wore the mask of virtue. Robert Porter died 2 weeks after giving me the documents. His family contested his will, claimed he was mentally incompetent, tried to seize all his property, including, they specifically mentioned, any historical documents. They knew he'd taken something, knew he'd given it to someone. They're still looking for me, still trying to recover their evidence. But it's too late. I've made copies, digital scans, distributed them globally. The truth is out of their reach. The modern descendants of the Shadow Court have adapted their methods. They don't burn women anymore. They destroy them economically, socially, professionally. Every woman in Salem who's tried to investigate the real history has faced harassment, lost jobs, lost reputation, been driven out of town. Dr. Patricia Williams, trying to excavate one of the mass graves in 1997, had permission from the landowner, had a team of archaeologists, was doing everything legally. The night before the excavation, she was arrested, charged with planning to disturb human remains without proper permits. But she had the permits. They disappeared from city records. She spent 2 years fighting the charges, lost her position at Boston University, never worked in archaeology again. Jennifer Thompson, a journalist for the Salem News, wrote a series of articles in 2003 questioning discrepancies in colonial records, suggesting more than 20 women died in the witch trials. Her editor killed the series after 2 articles. She was reassigned to covering garden shows. When she persisted, she was fired. Her husband, who worked for a company owned by the Hawthorne Trust, was also fired. They had to leave Salem, start over in another state. Mary Rodriguez, a high school history teacher, created a lesson plan about the Shadow Court based on historical anomalies. Parents complained. The school board intervened. She was told to stick to the approved curriculum. When she refused, she was suspended, then fired, then blacklisted. can't teach anywhere in Massachusetts. They destroyed her career for trying to teach truth. But the truth is spreading. The internet makes it harder to control information, harder to silence voices, harder to hide evidence. Young people are asking questions, demanding answers, refusing to accept the official story. A group of Salem State University students started investigating in 2022. They call themselves the Shadow Court Project. They're documenting everything, creating databases, mapping grave sites, identifying descendants. They've been threatened, suspended, expelled, but they keep working, keep digging, keep revealing. They've found that the 200 women murdered by the Shadow Court had over 600 direct descendants who are alive today. These descendants are organizing, filing lawsuits, demanding recognition, demanding justice, demanding that Salem acknowledge what really happened. The city is fighting back, claiming statute of limitations, claiming lack of evidence, claiming historical immunity. But they're scared. For the first time in 3 centuries, they're scared. The truth they've hidden is emerging. The victims they've erased are being named. The profits they've accumulated are being questioned. The 6 families are closing ranks, moving money offshore, destroying documents, selling properties. They know what's coming. What happens when everyone learns that Salem's wealth is built on murdered women? That its famous witch trials were just the tip of the iceberg? That the real trials lasted 60 years and killed 200 women? Some family members are breaking ranks. Younger generations who are horrified by their heritage, who want to make amends, who are providing information, documents, DNA samples. They're choosing truth over blood, choosing justice over inheritance. Rebecca Putnam, age 23, gave me her family's entire archive. 400 pounds of documents, centuries of evidence. She said she couldn't live with the weight of it anymore, couldn't pretend not to know, couldn't profit from murder. She's been disowned, cut off, threatened, but she doesn't care. She says the truth is worth more than blood money. Thomas Hawthorne, age 31, is using his trust fund to pay for DNA testing of remains, funding archaeological excavations, supporting descendants of victims. His family is trying to have him declared mentally incompetent, trying to seize his assets, trying to silence him. But he's fighting back, using their own wealth against them, using their own laws, using their own system. The truth about Salem is this: it's a city built on feminicide, the systematic murder of women for profit and control. The witch trials everyone knows about were just the public face. The real trials, the shadow trials, killed 10 times as many women, stole their property, erased their names, built a dynasty of blood that rules Salem to this day. Every October, millions of tourists come to Salem, buy witch hats, take ghost tours, visit museums. They're walking on mass graves. They're funding the descendants of murderers. They're participating in the continued erasure of 200 women. But not for much longer. The truth is out. The evidence is spreading. The descendants are organizing. The Shadow Court is being dragged into the light. 3 centuries of lies are crumbling. 3 centuries of silence are ending. The women murdered by Salem's Shadow Court are finally getting their voices back. Through DNA, through documents, through descendants who refuse to forget, through researchers who refuse to stop, through truth that refuses to stay buried. Their names are being spoken. Their stories are being told. Their murders are being acknowledged. Their graves are being found. Their descendants are being identified. Their truth is being validated. Mary Blackwood, Elizabeth Hartley, Sarah Nightingale, Anne Bradley, Susan Mitchell, Alice Harper, Ruth Marshall, Rebecca Morse, Sarah Chen, Hannah Foster, Mary Townsend, Catherine Morris, Margaret Fletcher, and 207 others, murdered between 1693 and 1750 by Salem's Shadow Court for the crime of being women with property, women with power, women with potential. They thought they could erase these women from history. They were wrong. The dead don't stay silent forever. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Justice doesn't stay denied forever. Salem's other witch trial, the one that killed 200 women, is finally being exposed. The shadow court that operated for 58 years is finally being revealed. The families that profited from murder are finally being named. The Putnams, the Hawthorns, the Porters, the Ingersolls, the Corwins, the Hathorns. They built their fortunes on the bodies of women, built their power on stolen property, built their legacy on lies. But legacies can be destroyed. Power can be taken. Fortunes can be returned. Justice can be served, even 3 centuries later. The women murdered by Salem's Shadow Court deserve justice, deserve recognition, deserve to have their stories told, their names spoken, their deaths acknowledged, their lives honored. This is their story. This is their truth. This is their justice. Finally, after 300 years of silence. Salem's real witch trial killed 200 women, not 20, 200. And the families who killed them still control Salem today. But not for much longer. The truth is out. The Shadow Court is exposed. The dead are speaking. And Salem will never be the same. And that's the story they didn't want you to know. Wild, right? If you made it this far, respect. You're one of the real ones. Subscribe if you want more. Hit the bell, drop a comment with your theory. I'm Dimitri. Keep questioning everything. See you next time.